This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
This might sound weird, but the Pittsburgh Steelers remind me of a Ford Taurus. The Ford Taurus, for those of you who don't know, because this car is no longer in production, but if you're my age, and especially if you're older, you would remember that the Ford Taurus was Ford's full-size sedan offering, right? There's their mid-size sedan, the Ford Focus. Then there is basically your kid's first car size sedan and the Ford Fiesta. Right? Goes up levels. The Steelers remind me of a Ford Taurus because the Ford Taurus was pretty good, right? It wasn't a bad car. It just wasn't the best car at anything in its class, right? If you wanted something a little bit more sporty, you could get a Mazda 6, you can get a Honda Accord. Those were the more sporty full size sedans. If you wanted something super reliable, you can get a Toyota Corolla, right? Those are super reliable. They're not luxury full-size sedans. They're not a Mercedes. They're not a BMW. They're not even like a Lincoln or a Lexus, but you know, it holds its own. It is a car that gets you to work. It is a car that you can drive to a business meeting and not be embarrassed to walk out of. It is a car that is made purposely to make no statements. It's not a bad car. It's a pretty good car. It's a playoff car. Not a championship car. Not a car that you think you're going to ride to. Like, it's nobody's dream car is the Ford Taurus. But if you end up in a Ford Taurus, you're not mad about it, right? You know, but you're still thinking about the BMW you could be in, or you're wondering if you could have got a Kia for cheaper and been just as happy, or you're like, okay, well, maybe I wanted something more sporty. That is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are a full-size, semi-luxury sedan. They have a defense that isn't the best at any one thing. They have pretty damn good defensive line, solid linebackers, some decent corners. But the overall package is not the best in the NFL, right? We've seen the Minka TJ Watt combination on defense. Alex Highsmith's pretty good. Cam Hayward's great, but he's getting up there in age, and we'll see what Pat Queen provides to this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. But we all know it's going to be a pretty damn good defense. Not going to be a top 5 one, but somewhere within that top 10 conversation towards the 10, 7, 8, 9 range, right? That's where Pittsburgh's defense sits. Their offense, it's not good. It's not as bad as people make it out to be. They're still able to move the ball, score points. They're not an inept offense despite having bad quarterback play over the last 3 years. You know, it's serviceable, right? It's not embarrassing, but it's not great. It's kind of where Pittsburgh's offense is. Their special teams are good, right? They have pretty damn good special teams. They're a Ford Taurus. This is no insult to Pittsburgh, by the way. This is just I think, a fair valuation of where they are. Again, Ford Taurus, you can make the playoffs with the Ford Taurus. If somebody pops up with a new Ford Taurus, you expect that they have a good job, a career, right? Like a legitimate career. But you don't think they in charge. And that's the Ford Taurus, and that's Pittsburgh, right? Like, they got a good thing going. They're going to be somewhere in the playoff hunt. But you know they ain't the ones like that you worry about being like Super Bowl contenders. It's not really where Pittsburgh sits. Even if they mess around and like win 10, 11, 12 games, you kind of know what the faults are of this Pittsburgh Steelers roster, and these aren't faults that you could easily escape from. Now let's look at who Pittsburgh lost this offseason, and who they chose to replace those guys with in the offseason. They lost Deontay Johnson, their number one receiver from last year, Kenny Pickett, Chuks Okorafor, and Patrick Peterson. So all in all, they really only lost Deontay Johnson. They chose to trade him. If you look at who they replaced Kenny Pickett with the combination of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. I've talked about this a ton. I'll just give you guys the Spark Notes version of this. Is Russell Wilson an upgrade from Kenny Pickett? Yes. But is it a big enough upgrade that it matters? I'm not convinced. I don't think Russell Wilson puts anybody over the top in 2024. Maybe in 2019, this could have been the case, but in 2024, I don't think Russ does it. A lot of people on the internet seem to be much higher than on Justin Fields than what people not on the internet are on Justin Fields. I'll believe it when I see it, but people have been hyping up Justin Fields for years. He's been, another quarterback. Like, he hasn't really been much special in the NFL, unfortunately. So that quarterback situation, I kind of just look at it as it stayed the same. Like, they walked in last year, didn't really have a quarterback for the long term. They walk in this year, they don't really have a quarterback for the long term. I think it's just a dude to start this year. That's really what Russ is. Like, it's the same thing as signing Josh McCown back in the day. It's the same thing as when you sign like Jacoby Brissett or Gardner Minshew to start. They just signed a dude to start this year. That's really what it is for Pittsburgh. And I think that's how they view it as well. So kind of a lateral move there, but I don't mind it. Wide receiver Van Jefferson is wide receiver is the biggest one to me. I did not realize how bad Pittsburgh's wide receiving room was until I did the wide receiver breakdown edition of AFC North Talk. And oh my God, Van Jefferson is really going to be the one that's Van Jefferson or Roman Wilson is really going to be the one that's going to be asked to replace Deontay Johnson. Van Jefferson. Look, man, I give Baltimore all kind of flack about how bad their wide receiving room is. Their room looks like the Bengals room compared to whatever it is that Pittsburgh has going. I had somebody tell me that like Marquez Callaway might be the number 2 receiver this year. It's bad. It's not good. And look, I know Steeler fans will try to convince you otherwise, that this isn't as bad as I'm making it out to be. But let's be honest. If it wasn't as bad as I make it out to be, they wouldn't be sitting here begging the Steelers to trade for Brandon Ayuk or Courtland Sutton every minute of every day. They know it's not good to go into the season with Van Jefferson as their number 2 receiver or like Roman Wilson. Like, am I missing something? Please let me know if I'm missing something. But their number 2 wide receiver situation is bad. And that's number 2 wide receiver. That's very concerning for Pittsburgh, especially when you consider that their number 1 in George Pickens is not the type of wide receiver who's going to have the most complex route trees in his resume, which means there's only so many ways you can get George Pickens the ball. He runs 6 routes. He runs 3 of those 6 routes at a high level. It's difficult to get him the ball. Now, the 3 routes he runs at a high level, he's great at, but he's not Randy Moss where he could just run a 9 and live off of that. He's not that talented, but he's pretty talented. He's 1,200 yard talented at his current skill level with how many routes he has to his name. But unless he becomes a technician over the summer, I really don't see how this receiving room is going to work. Chuks is out. They replaced him with Troy Fontanu. Now, the one area where I would not give Pittsburgh any criticism is their offensive line reconstruction. I think they've done a excellent job. I love what they've done with their offensive line. They got a center in the draft. They got Mason McCormick. Y'all know I liked him coming out of South Dakota State as a guard in the draft. And they got Troy Fontano. So they have a right tackle. They have a center. They have a guard. All three of those players I feel really good about. I think their trenches are going to be pretty built up. And they also have Paris Johnson that they drafted last year. They have a good young offensive line, or at least in a couple of years, they will have a very good young offensive line. They've done an excellent job rebuilding that offensive line. And then when it comes to replacing Patrick Peterson, that's going to be with Cam Sutton. Now, it just came down that Cam Sutton got an 8-game suspension for a domestic battery charge. So who knows who's replacing Cam Sutton, who's replacing Pat Peterson. The Steelers have always played it loose with corner and kind of got away with it. But the issue when they play it loose at corner is that they have to use Minkah to supplement some of the insufficiencies that the cornerback room has. And when they do that, they become a worse defense because this defense really hinges off of Minkah Fitzpatrick having the freedom to move around. But when he has to play Mr. Handyman Fix-It for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he can't do the stuff that he's special at, which means you don't get the best out of Minkah Fitzpatrick. And he's primely set up to be in that situation again. I thought they would go after a corner, but I can't complain with what they did because they really went hard in attacking that offensive line. And that's going to be something that pays dividends in a year or two. Not necessarily this year, but a year or two. And I think they're okay with that trade-off because they feel like they could find a corner maybe next year in the draft. So I can understand that decision making. So when I look at the Pittsburgh Steelers offseason, I think they upgraded their offensive line. They will have a pretty damn good offensive line by 2026 at the very least. It might be pretty damn good in 2024, but with that many young players, it's hard to make those kind of projections, especially on the offensive line. So I'm going to give it a couple of years till that pays off, but I love what they did with the offensive line. Another area I think they upgraded is inside linebacker by bringing in Pat Queen. I think he is a playmaker that they've needed on that linebacking core for a very long time. A lot of Pittsburgh's linebackers have been Mr. Fix-It type guys, but not necessarily playmaker, downhill attack guys. I look at Pat Queen as very similar, but not as effective. JOK. Right? Somebody who likes to trigger downhill, can cover a little bit, but mainly a playmaker. And if he's allowed to play make for the Steelers defense, he will make a difference there and maybe make up for Minkah Fitzpatrick having to play Mr. Handyman Fix-It. And maybe they do have a more dominant attack. Also, where Patrick Queen is going to help the Pittsburgh Steelers is in the pass rush. Pat Queen gets to the quarterback. He gets pressures. This is part of his game. You add that to a defensive line, or you add that to an attack where you already have to worry about TJ Watt. You already have to worry about Alex Highsmith. You already have to worry about Cam Hayward. And you can see that pass rush has the potential to be a little bit more lethal than it has been in the last couple of years. But that wide receiver downgrade is so serious. Like, we really got to talk about how serious that downgrade is. Go look at the depth chart. Go to PittsburghSteelers.com and look at that wide receiver room and tell me you have any confidence in any of those names, not named George Pickens. And let's not act like George Pickens is the most reliable person. I don't see a recipe for great things to happen with that wide receiver room. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a hidden gem here. Maybe Roman Wilson pops up and he's the next Antonio Brown. I saw him at the Pro Bowl. I saw him at the Senior Bowl. I like Roman Wilson. Do I think he's that good? Absolutely not. But, I guess people can dream. I don't know where Steeler fans are dreaming with this, by the way, but that wide receiver room stinks, man. We have to talk about how much of a downgrade that is from last year, and it's not like they had a great wide receiver room last year, even with Deontay Johnson. Let's talk about Arthur Smith. Now, depending on who you talk to, Arthur Smith is either the sole architect of Derrick Henry's success in Tennessee and should only be judged by what he did in Tennessee, Or Arthur Smith is a nepotism hire who got the chance to actually do a real job with the Atlanta Falcons and failed miserably when he was put in control of the Atlanta Falcons offense. Gonna be honest, both those reads are compelling, right? You can look at the stuff with Derrick Henry and think to yourself, oh my God, look what he did. And then look how he elevated what Ryan Tannehill could do. And you could see that be something where he can maybe get a similar renaissance out of Russell Wilson that he got out of Ryan Tannehill. So I do think that read that like you should only judge Arthur Smith off of what he did in Tennessee is not a good one. I do think that you have to give him credit for what he did in Tennessee. He did get Ryan Tannehill to a point where people were considering Ryan Tannehill getting like an MVP vote. Like, we cannot act like that didn't happen. That was Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator. He did a damn good job at Tennessee for a few years, and he did figure out a way to get Derrick Henry the ball and did build a good offense there, had A.J. Brown, right? Like, there are some good things in that resume. He's also the person who decided to stubbornly stick with Desmond Ridder. He's also the guy who underutilized Kyle Pitts to the point to where we don't even think about Kyle Pitts anymore, and he was a top 5 pick and thought of as a generational tight end prospect. He's also somebody who, despite numbers pointing in one direction, decided to Nick Chubb or Hugh Jackson Bijan Robinson this year. I don't know what to make of Arthur Smith. Ultimately, the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have a good enough defense to play with anybody. Ultimately, the Steelers are going to not turn the ball over offensively enough to play with anybody. They have Mike Tomlin, and with Mike Tomlin, you're almost guaranteed, no matter who your coordinators are, no matter who your quarterback is, to be competent. Like, Mike Tomlin is competence personified. And that means that you're going to win a good amount of games, not because you're better than the other team, but because you're more competent than the other team. And we've seen this. If we're Browns fans, we've all watched this. If you've watched any football, you've watched this. Competence wins football games. And the Pittsburgh Steelers have a ton of competence, which is why they will be over 500. But it's why they're a Ford Taurus. Ford Taurus is competent. Very competent car. It's just not going to get you to the championship game. And that's what Pittsburgh is. They're a very competent full-size sedan. But nothing less, nothing more. That's my thoughts on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.